batteries, bike to e-bike conversions,
battery diagnosis and repairs,
mid-drive conversion kits, ready-made e-bikes,
service and repair. Get in touch today at lebikes.co.uk or call or WhatsApp 07355 301 029.
Hi everybody, what is up? My name is Liam Angel, aka Straight Shooting LJ, and welcome to another LE Bikes podcast and vlog episode. Now, we're going to go a bit off the beaten path today and do a program review. That program being the Panorama special called E-Bikes, the Battle for Our Streets, hosted by Adrian Chiles. More on that later. Now, full disclosure on Adrian Chiles. First and foremost, I enjoyed him as host of Match of the Day 2 years ago. I enjoyed his deadpan humour, but he started to grate on me when he jumped on ITV and was on the World Cup coverage. But since he started talking about bikes and electric bikes on his Guardian columns, he's gone full grumpy grandpa to an almost absurd degree. But you know what? I digress. Back in January 2025, about a month ago as I record this, there was a Panorama documentary called E-Bikes, the Battle for Our Streets, which of course is a deliberately inflammatory title. And as expected, it clearly sets out its agenda early, with the opening shots leaning heavily towards the menace of electric bikes, showing phones being swiped and people being knocked over. But this slant makes sense, considering Adrian Chiles is doing the voiceover and hosting it. And as said, we know his feelings on e-bikes already from the outset. He was right though about it being us being in a boom for e-bikes, but convenience for criminals is a weird stance to take, especially as the same types of theft have been done on mopeds and bicycles for decades. And the shot that was shown to illustrate his point wasn't even an e-bike. It was what looked like a Surron, which is actually an electric motorbike, not an electric bike. So I definitely take umbrage with the early soundbite that in cities the e-bike is a very dominant form of transport, because it's not. That's still the domain of cars. I mean, just ask anybody who has to commute during rush hour. And also, let's not forget how many people in London use the tube every day. So from the outset, within the first minute, we can see the way this documentary is going to go. And also the agenda it was going to push, which definitely is not pro e-bike, unfortunately. Adrian Chiles is funny because he started by saying an e-bike is too easy to get used to. And he was saying it as a negative, which is moronic, as that is literally the point of anything and exactly what you'd want as a consumer, manufacturer, or retailer. You want it to be easy to use and easy to get used to. And it's not a cheat. To say that about a line bike that has no throttle made no sense either. But as Adrian Chiles said, as I said, this is Adrian Chiles and he'll go out of his way to bury e-bikes. I mean, him saying e-bikes are shooting around all over our streets and it's all a bit hairy. Again, the hyperbole here is silly, considering those in cars are the real danger, especially in London. And I can personally attest to that, as I've been a victim of a hit and run within the past 2 years. The opening interviewee, a so-called Londoner, who was asked about e-bikes, he actually made no sense with his opening statement about rules in e-bikes. He started to say there were no rules, then he quickly doubled back and said people don't know them, which is a lazy generalization. So it's like, which one? No rules or people don't know them? Speaking of lazy, Chiles' comparison of navigating a bike lane in embankment and the M6 in rush hour was just moronic. It really was. And the youngsters after talking about a 45 mile per hour e-bike, they're not talking about an e-bike. With that level of speed, again, e-motorbike. But most people don't know the distinction. Tomorrow's World and the Blue Peter footage for 40 years ago showing early e-bikes was actually cool to see. And Dr. Alex Nurse, who was from the University of Liverpool and the urban planning commission, talking about the barriers into cycling and how e-bikes can basically break down these barriers. I felt he was spot on. And he probably did go into a bit more detail, but of course, that was probably edited out as it wouldn't fit the negative narrative. But Stephen Bird from The Telegraph was made to instantly look like a naysayer who was on the side of pedestrians. And admittedly, some things have maybe not been thought out. Like, for example, floating bus stops. But I've blogged about that before, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. Sushila Dal from the Oxford Pedestrians Association saying e-bikes should be reclassified to be on the roads and not using pavements, to me showed how ill-informed she is in regards to the laws surrounding e-bikes and also for regular bikes, because neither are actually allowed legally on the pavements anyway. And regular cyclists have actually been subject to 60 quid on the spot fines for being caught riding on the pavement since about 2006? If memory serves me correctly, because I actually remember dodging a fine when I got caught on the pavement a few days after that law came into effect. So, for me, confiscation, on-the-spot fines and proper enforcement can stop cyclists and e-bike riders breaking the rules. And in my experience with pedestrians, the amount of them who step out into the road whilst glued to their phones, doing that, or step into the roads without looking, it's astronomical. And I see this regularly, even when I'm doing the school run with my kids. So pedestrians are not innocent in this either. But yes, some e-bike riders are legitimately dangerous. I'm not taking away from that. Once again, though, after the Oxford segment, when Chiles narrates about the pedal assist speed laws for e-bikes, the images shown are of Surons, which again are not e-bikes. But they always get lumped in with them. And this causes a misconception. And speaking of misconception, Chiles is perpetuating a false version of the e-bike laws. The law actually is that pedal assist should cut out at 15.5 miles an hour. But in regards to pressing a button, you actually can legally have a throttle, but it can only propel you at a maximum speed of around about 3.7 miles per hour, which is the walk assist, without having to be type approved and without having to be taxed and insured as a motor vehicle like a moped. He didn't mention that. Also, there's a misnomer about the 250 watt limit, which is actually the limit for continuous power, not maximum power, which is an important distinction, as a lot of e-bikes are rated at 250 watts continuous power, but can reach at least twice that at maximum power for short distances and short bursts. But of course, Chiles showed that he doesn't know this. And sadly, it seemed like the researchers for this Panorama special didn't dig deep enough to find that out either. It was, on a personal note though, nice to see the BBS HD get some airtime. But bear in mind, that's 1,000 watts. And the e-bike collector they used, he was kind of an odd one, as he seemed happy to go along with the narrative of e-bikes being dangerous. But either he didn't get to, or it was edited out in regards to what power rating the converted e-bike he had was, and why it would basically be classed as a moped with the 28 mile per hour speed it was hitting. And he said he regretted doing. Probably only said that because he was on camera. It was sad to see though the segment after going straight into burying Engwe as a brand, as a lot of other brands are doing a lot higher powered e-bikes than they are. And I'm not just saying that because we're an official distributor for them, but for me, Adrian Chiles, of course, bemoaned the cycle to work scheme, basically inferring that it was being abused to buy illegal bikes, e-bikes. But just because the cycle to work option was on a Google search. And it was one of them ones where not everyone's abusing it. And it's very lazy also that Chiles even said the site featured was the first website he went to. And he clearly just based his opinions not only on one website, but on one e-bike that engwe sell out of the many they have that are road legal, including ones such as the E26, for instance. The Swiss through the Baloise group doing research into the impact of accidents using crash tests to raise awareness, and saying that improper usage and popularity, a combo of the two, are causing a rising number of accidents. That's actually fair enough on both ends. But it was also good to hear Thomas Schob of Balois say that its intention was to increase safety for all road users, which is fine by me because that's how it should be. The shot after, though, Chiles talking about e-bikes being bigger and heavier than normal bikes. Well, no crap, Sherlock, but that actually doesn't count the folding ones. But they also generally have better braking than normal bikes, and a lot of the higher power e-bikes have hydraulic braking as standard. And also, something annoying again was the shot of the kid getting mowed down by a line bike being shown for the second time. But if you actually look at that closely, the youngster is basically jogging with an umbrella across a cycle lane. And you can see the kid hasn't and isn't looking both ways and is looking straight ahead to where he's going, which is especially dangerous in wet weather where it's a lot harder to stop on a dime on a normal bike, let alone an e-bike. So again, that shot is perpetuating another misconception, and all it does is just place the blame game on e-bikes again, when it actually was not the e-bike rider's fault, if you look at it. There's another incident shown with an e-bike rider ploughing into a child on a scooter, and that's definitely the e-bike rider's fault. No doubt. No getting away from that. But as said, it's the rider's fault, and he's a delivery rider. But more on that issue later, because there's another bunch of layers to that problem. But continuing along that thread, we have the Daily Telegraph reporter again, and he says one of the more moronic statements so far, when he says, with no evidence to back it up, that because more people are potentially looking at e-bikes as a viable form of transport, then more pedestrians will be involved in accidents. Again, an assumption plucked out of the air. No numbers, nothing of that. And of course, the producers of this Panorama special must have lapped that up when it came to editing. Of course, Panorama found someone who had a relative hit and killed by someone on an e-bike, and they blamed an e-bike, or so it seemed. But with all due respect, the guy was in his 90s, and it was actually a heart attack later on that killed him. So again, with all due respect, it's a speculative link between the e-bike and the gentleman's death. Now, I'm not denying that an e-bike caused injuries to the elderly man, the e-bike rider, and yes, that is bad, but it wasn't the direct cause of death like it was portrayed. And again, this sort of portrayal is dangerous. As said, that's the e-bike rider's fault, not the e-bike itself. The government not distinguishing between e-bikes and regular bikes is a problem, but the number of deaths involving or by bikes, whether electric or not, needs to be put into context versus cars and buses, etc. But of course it isn't, because that wouldn't paint the negative picture that isolated facts do in this special. The people interviewed in Birmingham, Christ almighty, that was brutal to watch. The first gentleman saying about them going on pavements and where people are walking and stuff like that, the way he spoke made it sound like he'd been fed that line. And the next person who was talking about electric motorbikes, again, misinformed. As e-bikes and e-motorbikes are two different things. It's an oxymoron to say both are the same. But again, it's lazy misconceptions perpetuated by the media, as per usual in my view. The third person, though, the third gentleman who said you can't hear an e-bike because they're silent. I literally did the Jesus facepalm and was like, a regular bike is silent as well, you moron. So that's just an idiotic comparison. The delivery riders, though, being vilified. This is part of the problem with Just Eat, Uber Eats, Deliveroo, and the gig economy in general. But again, more on that later. I'm going to come back to that. Adrian Chiles, though, showed the lack of credible research done on this special when he complains about an e-bike outside of McDonald's, saying that it's a 750 watt bike, but he doesn't talk about whether that's peak wattage or continuous. Because again, that e-bike could be 250 watts continuous, but 750 watts peak wattage, which is actually road legal. You look at most Bosch motors, for instance. The delivery rider they spoke to about Deliveroo getting you to take a picture of your bike and send it to them. Yeah, that's a really foolproof strategy from a multinational company. But this is part of the problem with these gig economy companies. To make decent money, you have to do as many orders as you can, as quickly as you can, as you're making a pittance per delivery, generally around £3-4. And I say this from experience. Slightly more if it's a stacked order with multiple drop-offs. So that's why these guys are on souped up e-bikes, running red lights and taking pavement shortcuts. And spot checks. I've worked for Uber Eats and Just Eat. And Just Eat said they spot check during the training. But let's be honest, these companies won't want to waste their money hiring people to spot check, because that would be a major undertaking in and of itself, just to track down the riders, especially if they're on the move. And a lot of riders do what's called multi-apping. So you may see them in Just Eat gear, but work in Uber Eats that day, or Deliveroo, or vice versa. So it's basically impossible to keep track of who's riding what. So police barricades, such as the ones I've encountered before, where they stop riders in a random spot, such as just off Portobello Road, which happened to me, is more likely to work in practice and in theory. But you know what? It's a crowded marketplace, the gig economy, to say the least. And it's been made deliberately tough by these delivery companies to see if the riders are breaking the law or not, because there are too many riders to keep tabs on. And this is an issue that could have a whole documentary series on it to dissect it properly, not just a casual sentence or two. And that's where I go on it. The gentleman in the next segment with the small white e-bike that was seized was a kind of interesting case study, because similar to what happened to me in mid to late 2024, because his e-bike on throttle was reaching 25 kilometers per hour, I mean, he was always going to get it confiscated. When you've got the bike off the ground with no weight on it, it's always going to go that fast. But the size of the rider having the e-bike seized would have had a major bearing on that speed. But again, that's context not kept in mind when his e-bike was seized. If it's reaching 25 kilometers an hour under no load, it may be half that or even less that with the rider on board, especially when you looked at the size of it. So next we go on to Surons again being lumped in with e-bikes. But the segment was interesting as it showed a police lockup with confiscated e-bikes. But it's interesting that throughout this Panorama special, it's only been the negative focused on. And there was only a glimmer of the positive of e-bikes shown. And coming back to Dr. Alex Nurse from the University of Liverpool, I was impressed with him. Because again, he was spot on about the future being dedicated cycle lanes and infrastructure needing improving, like in the Netherlands, where bikes and e-bikes have their own space, along with other motorists. And I think he was right in saying if you blur the lines, then the culture breaks down before it's even been established. So segregated bike/e-bike infrastructure would keep cyclists and e-bike riders safe. And this is important for us, as this Panorama special doesn't once talk about the threat of other road users against cyclists. And I felt that Adrian Chiles' outro saying, oh, he came into the documentary grumpy. I literally said out loud, you still are grumpy. And whether he meant to or not, he literally admits he came into this documentary not knowing much about e-bikes, which makes his negative comments about e-bikes in his Guardian articles look idiotic and makes him look like a major hypocrite. But it also basically admits he came into it completely biased and with a negative agenda about the subject matter, which he never admits to. And that really shows throughout the entire half-an-hour documentary special with the way it's edited. And as a professional video editor myself, with 20 years experience, I know the tricks used to perpetuate a certain narrative, whether subtle or blatant. And there were subtle moments as well as blatant moments that showed this was a hit piece on e-bikes from Panorama, and specifically Adrian Chiles, as letting him present this was no accident. And it would have been a completely different story if it was from a cycling enthusiast such as Timmy Mallet, for instance, who is very clued up, I must say. The special showed some B-roll clips which contradicted the message they were trying to get across. As mentioned about Surons being shown. Also, one of the last two shots with the Santander bikes coming around the corner, down, I think, on County Hall on Westminster Bridge. If you look closely, you'll see the pedestrian isn't looking where they're going, and he's got his phone in his hand, and that's his main focus. And the two guys coming round the corner, they're not even on e-bikes. Those are regular Santander bikes. So again, this makes the agenda pushing sloppy. And with all due respect to the editor on this production, like the online and offline editors, from one editor to another, it makes him and the rest of the production team look a bit sloppy too. Because your shots should match the narrative you're putting across, not contradict it. And this special is riddled with that kind of problem, where the B-roll shots they show contradict the point they're making, whether it be the point on narration or the pieces to camera. Biased bullshit, and nothing but a thinly veiled hit piece that didn't show any of the true upsides of e-bikes in any great detail. That's what you can basically categorize this as. And it was titled E-Bikes, The Battle for Our Streets, and it was hosted by Adrian I Hate E-Bikes Chiles. So I expected nothing less, really. I mean, Panorama have done some quality work in the past, but this is not one of those pieces. And the biased broadcasting corporation, as I call the BBC, have no problem putting out their own or putting out other slanted agenda-based material that demonizes e-bikes and shows very little to no opposing viewpoint and even less context. Because it doesn't talk about rider responsibility, at least not enough, nor does it talk enough about the gig economy and that industry fueling the issues. And even if it was an hour long, I really doubt that they do much more with the additional half hour than vilify e-bikes even more, as opposed to presenting a more balanced discussion around e-bikes, e-bike riders, and also pedestrians and motorists, instead of just trying to pin the blame for most accidents on e-bikes in a deliberately inflammatory manner. Which is actually sad, because e-bikes, as I've discussed here before on the LE Bikes podcast and vlogs, have many benefits for people young and old, and can be extremely helpful, for example, for parents as well. I mean, I personally do the school run with two of my kids using an e-bike with a child seat on the front and a rear trailer. And my knees aren't in the greatest condition. So e-bikes are a life and money saver for me, especially for longer journeys. So specials such as this represent yet another missed, and let's be honest, deliberately blown opportunity to redress the balance and help inform people of how e-bikes could help them, as opposed to continuing to fearmonger and stir up more anti-e-bike rhetoric. Even when Adrian Chiles, funnily enough, he said he enjoyed being on an e-bike and he wished he had one as a kid, he tried to double back when he realised what he'd said by going back to the negative rhetoric. Same with his less than genuine feeling outro. But you know what? I want to know your thoughts. Is Adrian Chiles harbouring an absurd agenda against e-bikes, or does he raise some valid points but goes too far based on a lack of knowledge? Do you share his views on e-bikes, or are you on the more positive side of the fence when it comes to electric bikes and their usefulness? Does there need to be more regulation or more education? Let me know. lebikes.co.uk is the official website. We do bike to e-bike conversions. We sell a number of different types of e-bikes as well. We're an official and authorized distributor and reseller for engwe e-bikes, as well as himiway long range e-bikes as well. We've got more brands coming and more types of e-bikes coming as well. We do have some refurbished and limited warranty e-bikes. We can repair e-bikes. We can service e-bikes. We do have a battery repair and diagnosis service as well. So if you've got an e-bike battery that is not giving you as much range as it used to, bring it to us. We'll have a look. We'll diagnose it, see if we can get that repaired and get you back on the road safely, I must add as well. You know what? We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, aka X. We're on TikTok. everywhere on socials where you are. That is where we are. LE Bikes or LE Bikes LTD. Have a look for us. We got our tips and tricks, our quick tip series, as well as our podcasts and vlogs wherever you pick up your podcast, and also on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. We've got short clips as well. As I said, the quick tips and the tips and tricks series. We do, as I said, we do so much around electric bikes. You can give us a ring as well. That number 07355 301 029. Give us a ring. If you've got any questions in regards to e-bikes, give us a ring. We're also on WhatsApp on that number as well. I said, I have been Liam Angel, aka Straight Shooting LJA, and until next time on the LE Bikes podcast and vlog, thank you for joining us, and happy and safe riding, everybody. Take care.
Looking for an electric bike? Want to convert a bike you already have? Or just looking for an extra battery for your e-bike? Check out our range at lebikes.co.uk.